Here is part 2 of a short story my cousin wrote when she was about 12. I think this was 1969. What it is based on a little adventures we had as kids, our cousins and my brothers and my cousin and I. And it's sort of a Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew type of thing, where we find these two suspicious men around the grave of a horse. And here we go. Here's the conclusion. When we got back, we had dinner. After dinner, we watched TV. We watched until 10. Then we got our sleeping bags and went outside to spread them out. We put them in a dark place. We talked for a while until all the lights were out, which meant that the parents and Carl and Frank had gone to bed. At that time we put on our bathrobes and went into the woods with only one flashlight on. We each brought one flashlight, but we only turned mine on so as not to scare the men away if they were there. As we got closer to the grave and the hole, we started dodging behind trees and bushes because we saw lights. Dim ones, but lights. The lights were around the grave. As we got closer to the hole, we took off our shoes to be more quiet. We crawled into a hole, but alas, Lisa, just like a girl, hit a stick and it cracked. One of the men, the fat one with the cigar, jumped up, and luckily without flashlight, and came over to see what had made the noise. We were all in the dark shadows, so that the men did not see us. We wrote in the soil to Lisa that we would give her one more chance, and that if she did it again, she would have to go back into the front yard. She promised she would not do it again. I did a signal by putting my finger to my lips and a hand to my ear, which meant, "Be quiet, listen." So we did, and this is what we heard the fat man say. "It's got to be here unless SS took it, Joe. SS could not have taken it because how could they know where it was?" Then we heard a clank. "Ha ha," said the fat man, "get digging." I am," said Joe. After what seemed like years, we saw Joe lift an iron box out of the grave. Fat man gave a fiendish smile and said, "Now all we have to do is put the horse back in." Then we saw them go over to a pile of wheat we thought was dirt and pick up Lucky. They put her back in and covered her over with dirt. Then Fred, feeling sad, sniffed, and the man with the flashlight ran over to Joe. The fat man with the flashlight said, "Did you hear that?" Joe said, "Yes." They ran over to the hole where we crouched and shone the flashlight right on us, and Lisa gave out a little scream and everybody's mouth dropped. "Okay, kids, tell us what you're doing here." "Well," I stammered, "we were, sleeping overnight in our hole," broke in Eric. "Do you think they are telling the truth?" said Joe. "No," said the fat man with the cigar. "You kids better come with us." As they came closer to catch us, Eric tried to escape, but with one grab from Joe, he was pulled back. "These are tough kids," said Joe. "We better gag them." When we were gagged, they took us to the barn. They tied us up outside the barn, and they went in. We were tied up near the sharp barn latch, and with a bit of trouble, Fred cut himself loose. Fred had a jackknife in his back pocket, so he cut Eric, Lisa, Bob, and me loose. After that, we ran as fast as we could through the woods to our sleeping bags and went to sleep in the morning about 6 o'clock. We went up into the woods to explore last night's escapades. We decided against telling the parents about the men. We also decided to go to the barn and go through the hay thoroughly. As we went from the lawn through the trees, under a tree, and through the poison ivy, we were thinking what we should do if we found something in the hay, and if we did, what would it be? Finally, we got to the barn, but the door was stuck, and we could not get it open, no matter how hard we pushed. When I was just about to give up, we heard footsteps. "Quick, behind the barn," said Bob. We all plunged for the undergrowth behind the barn. I asked Fred to peep around the corner and see if he could see anything, so he did and said this is what he saw. He saw the man named Joe and the girl walking toward the barn without the fat man. As Fred watched, the girl was taking off her head. To our surprise, there was a man's head under it. "It must be a midget," said Fred. Then he was the man and the girl, now a man midget, walk into the barn. Then we saw the man and the girl, now a man midget, walk into the barn, and a few minutes later we saw the man and the midget drag out the fat man with the cigar. The cigar rested on his chin, and the fat man had what looked like had been a knife stuck in his back, but now it was bleeding. "Yek," said Bob, Fred, and Eric softly as they squinched up their noses. Lisa and I closed our eyes, but quickly opened them again to watch the man being dragged to the black convertible. As the car drove off, we stepped out of our hiding place and ran to the hole to hold a meeting. "That's one gone and two to go," said Fred. "I make a nomination to not tell the parents," I said. "What's a nomination?" said Fred. "A nomination is when you have an idea." All in favor raised their hand. Everybody raised his or her hand. "Good," I said. "I have a nomination why they killed the fat man," said Fred. "Not a nomination," I said. "A nomination," said Bob. "Right, a nomination then," said Fred. "Why do you think they killed him, Fred?" "Because they wanted his share of what was in the hay and what was in the box." "That's a good idea," said Bob. "So maybe one of the other two would try to kill the other so the one that did it would have all," I said. "That's right," said everybody. "So maybe we ought to sleep out again tonight," said Lisa. "I'll go ask," said Fred. "Okay, okay." The answer was yes, because they thought we had had a lot of sleep. So that night again we ate supper and watched TV until 10:30, and then spread our sleeping bags out under the shadows and put on our bathrobes. We all had very dark ones, like a navy blue and black. We again saw lights, except they were in the barn and they were not very dim. We hurried to the hole and decided to go around the field by going through the wood and coming up back of the barn. When we got there, we peeked through the barn window, but all we could see was the flashlight lying on the floor, and in the shadows we saw two shadows, a tall, thin man and a short, thin man, both with shovels. They were, of course, the man Joe and the midget, and they were shoveling the barn floor. Then one man, Joe, said, "Did you see that shadow in the window?" "No," said the midget. "Just your imagination. Keep on digging." That must have been Bob they saw in the window. Lucky for us, the midget thought it was just Joe's imagination. We all nodded our heads yes. Then we heard the two men rub their hands together, as if in glee. Joe said, "Those fool kids will never find Fat Cigar Man here if we bury him in the barn floor." And then he gave his fiendish laugh. We all looked at each other in amazement when he said, "Those fool kids." We looked in the window as the men threw dirt over the fat man and stomped on it to make it hard. Then we saw Joe and the midget pick up another bundle of hay as if it was heavy and carry it to the black convertible and put it under the seat. As we watched them drive off, we ran to the hall for a meeting to think what to do. "Let's go back and see if we can find any clues to who the fat man was, and maybe his ID card, and maybe the job he does." "Do you mean to say that we should dig him up?" said Lisa. "Of course." "Well, let's go," said Bob. As we ran through the field to the barn, a shiver of excitement ran up my spine, and I gave a leap into the air. When we got into the barn, we got the shovel off the wall and started digging. We took turns, but it was Fred who struck the man first. When he did, everybody fell down on their hands and knees and started pawing around. At last we found his wallet, but the only thing we found was $1 bill. In real life, my cousins were visiting our house, and we went into our woods, where we had a little fort, which was underground, where a neighbor's dead pony had been buried. My father had offered to have this service done. They took a tow truck, stuck it into the horse's neck, and put him there. Or her. In any case, our neighbors had tenants that summer, and when we went to our little fort in the ground there, these guys were digging with shovels, and we looked at them, and the guy said to us, "What, do you think I'm burying my wife?" And we never saw the wife again, and the 70s were weird.